Andrew, I'm so pleased to be back talking with you about the interface between psychotherapy and politics, something you've been embedded in for a long time. And of course, the purpose of our conversation today is to let people know about the conference that is upcoming, Dreams, Memories, and Activism. Of course, the conference is free, so it's a very low risk experience for colleagues just to jump in and be part of the conference. So we want to talk a little bit about that, and maybe we'll get a little bit of time to talk more widely about psychotherapy and politics, because I know that's always something that colleagues are interested to do. I'm very pleased to be able to let the online events community know about the conference. And I know some of those colleagues are Jungian psychotherapists or have had training in Jungian approaches. And of course, many aren't and haven't. Could you say a few things about why coming to the conference could also be a really good experience for colleagues who don't have much knowledge about Jungian approaches? Yeah.
I'm delighted to do it. I think everything I've done for online events over the last few years has been involved with politics in one way or another, so I feel secure here.
Mm.
10 years ago, a group of Jungian therapists, analysts, academics, and interested lay people started a movement called Analysis and Activism. It has had a series of successful conferences. It has produced 3 or 4 books and runs a Google group which is open to absolutely anybody. It's part of what I've called the political turn in the psychotherapies that has gone on in the last 25 years. And I've been very much involved in it, having co-founded Psychotherapists and Counselors for Social Responsibility. Now, this is Jungian, or in my terminology, post-Jungian, but it absolutely isn't restricted to the Jungian worldview. What happened was that perhaps the most introverted, quietistic school of psychotherapy suddenly went crazy for politics. This has been going on for longer than 10 years, and I think it is rooted in Jung, because Jung made several attempts to get involved in politics. Some of them were absolutely disastrous, and I've written excessively, perhaps, about some of the problems with Jung's work on race and anti-Semitism in particular. Nevertheless, he was interested in politics and culture. He felt that you couldn't keep them out of the consulting room and shouldn't at a time when the Freudian tradition was quite different. The conference is international. The themes are varied, but they're all what I call position papers. That means they're not actually addressing very specific problems, but the whole question of therapy thinking and politics. We have lots of non-Jungians involved in this. Why? Well, it's been quite difficult in many schools of psychotherapy and counseling to get political discussion and commentary onto the agenda. It has not been in the Jungian world. We've had the backing of our big international body, the International Association for Analytical Psychology. I'd like to say something later about what therapy doing politics means, its strengths, and I think we should admit its limitations. But that's the basic idea. There will be a link people can click. You have to RSVP to get the signing in stuff, but it is completely free. And I would like to say we already have about 300 plus people coming to this. So although we are very grateful and indeed desperate for the assistance of online events, if you didn't exist, we would still have the conference. Ha.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Yes. Yes, I appreciate that helping us to um, live in our humility at online events, hopefully, or have some humility. Um, and what's the bit that this conference like
Um, the
does,
main
or
the main book that these conferences spawned is this: Analysis and
Mm,
Activism,
mm,
Social and Political Contributions of Jungian Psychology. My own work has also been very important, books like The Political Psyche and A New Therapy for Politics. All of this is on the various websites. We're not very well organized. That's partly a Jungian thing, partly a political thing, and partly that's very much my preference. I think when you're doing political stuff in the therapy world, it's actually counterproductive to be too sophisticated and too and
mm.
too organized. So it is thoughtful, but not madly intellectual, would be the best way to say.
That's great. Yeah, that's a great description. And is there something about this conference that colleagues wouldn't find other places, like a kind of unique edge that it has that would really motivate colleagues to come along and participate?
Yes, I think there is a huge emphasis on what I would call political or social spirituality. This is not a religion-based spirituality. It's the spiritual but not religious,
Mhm.
SBNR. The fastest growing form of spirituality in the West is spiritual but not religious. The surveys show it. So there's a spiritual element, no question about it. And then there are some Jungian approaches, archetypes, complexes, things like that. Those will get mentioned by some of the speakers. A lot of Jungian analysts and therapists are involved in what I would call the collective trauma field. They've been involved in disasters like earthquakes, and in Japan, in the Fukuyama nuclear situation, in China, earthquakes, and also people from the Jungian world have gone into very problematic areas like Kailesha, the township or a kind of a city just outside Cape Town. The analysts are far more activist than you would imagine. So it would appeal to anyone who is into doing. That's very, very important. But I think the main distinguishing feature is that, and I think this will appeal, for example, to people from an existential background or from a person-centered background, transpersonal background. We're into spirituality, but of a political kind. It will be a red thread running through some of the papers.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, it's I just can't resist to ask you, I mean, what does that mean? A kind of political, spiritual. Can you say a little bit about
Yes.
that? How those things go together?
Well, here's my bit. I invented the term social spirituality. When you get together with people to do something political and you function as a group, it begins practically. It begins with a hard nosed, let's get things done, let's mount a campaign, let's go on the demonstration, let's take a direct action. That sounds not spiritual. But after a while, a kind of rain or moisture descends on that group. And that group offers an experience of social spirituality to the people in it. The group transforms, and the people in it, at least potentially, have a transformative experience. Now, there are two huge problems with this. Firstly, not all social spirituality is good. The spirit is politically neutral. Sorry, can't be helped. The political direction is up to us, up to you and me. That's the first problem. So social spirituality, you can see it in the English Defence League, you can see it in the Nazis, you can see it in Trump. The second problem is a great many people who come to therapy have never had this experience. You see, back in the day, we were supposed to interrogate clients and patients who were gung-ho for politics. Were they neglecting their family dynamics, their inner life, and so on? Well, now things have turned around, and we can see how political experience and opinions are absolutely part of selfhood and of the therapeutic process. But a lot of people who come to therapy have never had it. They simply have never got off their bottoms. They have simply never reached out to people to do something, even a neighborhood something, even about recycling. They just haven't done it. And what therapists need to realize is that the absence of social spirituality in a person's history is a problem. It's a much bigger problem than extreme political commitment. Extreme political commitment also has its problems, but the problems of not knowing what any of this is about, this is something that many of our clients and patients suffer from, and they bring to therapy. So that's a little bit about my
Yeah,
take
yeah.
on social uh, spirituality.
Thank you, Andrew. And do you conceptualize that as a problem for clients? Because without that, we're disconnected and isolated from
Yes,
from
yes.
society, from each other, and
Incomplete, missing out on experience. I mean, psychological energy, if you must, you can call it libido, flows down numerous channels. But it's not the case that the social or political channel is always in flood. It's often repressed. And that's a wonderful word because it cuts right across from the personal to the political. A lot of people, especially I think clients and patients have simply not gone there. Maybe they didn't dare. Maybe they didn't know that that channel, the political channel of self-expression, was actually there.
mm,
You see, to use my own words, people don't know that they have an inner politician. They're much more involved in politics than they know. Now, my talk, I'm going to tell you what my talk is about, and I'm going to show you something.
okay, great. Great to
My
get a preview, Andrew.
my talk is called The Joy of Politics. And I entitled that before Kamala Harris started talking about joy, long before I gave the title. It comes from this. Can you see the joy of sex? Do you
I
remember that?
I can indeed, and I do. Yes, yes.
Did you tell me? Did you ever read it?
I did. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
me
A key
too.
text,
Me too.
Andrew. A key text.
Yeah, we all read it. It's a
Yeah.
huge bestseller to this day. So I'm going to talk about the joy of politics as an experience akin to sex.
Mm,
And just as with sex, you could have good experiences, bad experiences, just mundane experiences. You can get very hurt and you can get very elevated and transformed. That's what I want to do. I want to, in a way, normalize politics as a kind of mode of self-expression, mode of being, mode of individuation. Truth to tell, there's nothing original about this. That's how it is. It just isn't named. That's what we saw very much in the existential conference recently, which, by the way, was absolutely incredible.
mm.
But people were talking about politics without knowing they were talking about politics some of the time. It was fascinating.
Could you give us an example of like those kinds of conversations that we might be having, but we're not naming them
Well,
as politics? Yeah.
yes, I don't think people are enough into the politics of intimate relationships. I mean the power dynamics, but I also mean how information is passed between people, how they relate to the outer, larger, wider
Mm,
world. Our lives, our personal lives are irradiated with politics. It's such a cliche, the personal is political, blah, blah, blah.
mm,
Of course, obviously, it is. But we still don't recognize how intimacy is penetrated, deliberate choice of word, by the political. Just as we don't recognize how The spiritual is penetrated by the political. My favorite quote of all time is from a French writer on culture called Charles Péguy from the 1920s. And he said, everything starts in mysticism and ends in politics. Mega profound remark.
Yeah.
So it's staring at
Mm.
us in the face. You know the Edgar Allan Poe story of the purloined letter, which was where it ought to be. The letter was missing, but in fact it was on the mantelpiece where it should have been. Everything is hidden in the open. This is a therapy perspective, but I think it's a very important one as well.
Yeah. Oh, Andrew, it's so interesting, but I feel like I'm at risk of asking you to questions that will mean that you give your talk here and now, and I want to keep something for the conference as well. But I wanted to go back to what you were saying about the rain or the moisture that descends on groups. And could you kind of describe what you think that, like, what do you think that is? Yeah.
If you've been involved in a political movement, then you will know about this. It's not something you have to do special techniques for. It's enough to be doing something in society, in the community, in the polis, with other people of similar mind. If you do that, something will happen. But if you don't do that, or if you've never done that, that something, that transformative elevation of mood and being won't happen. That's the risk here. There's another problem, actually. Do you remember earlier I said there were some problems that we got sidetracked?
Mm.
I want to talk about this next one because I think most of your people who are going to be listening to this, they're therapists, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When it comes to doing politics as a group of therapists, it is shit awful. It's absolutely terrible because therapists are programmed to be individualistic and not agree with one another. You saw that again in the um, existential conference. You see, when I started in politics in the 60s as a teenager, I was beginning in the anti apartheid movement. I ended up in South Africa working for the ANC and being put in prison. But back then it was it was the anti apartheid movement. Everybody agreed with each other about what was wrong, what had to be done. We were of like mind. When I got involved in more extreme Trotskyist left wing activities, people on the whole agreed. I mean, there were obviously arguments, but on the whole, people were of like mind. When you work in an anti Zionist context, for example, somewhere like the UK Palestine Mental Health Network, which I am involved with, you are of like mind. When therapists do politics and address those sorts of issues, race, Israel, Palestine, whatever, they are not of like mind. They are not linked by the political cause. They're linked by being therapists. And we Jungians had this problem too. Why were we in analysis and activism? Because we'd all basically trained in the same tradition. So we've had terrible arguments, and I'm going to talk about those. How does a group of therapists disagree and remain a politically committed group? It has sabotaged psychotherapists and counsellors for social responsibility. It has made life in the psychotherapy and counselling union and many other groups very difficult. Being therapists, in spite of the potential value of therapy when it comes to thinking about politics, being therapists is a recipe for disaster. That's
Mm.
a big, big problem. And it is no accident that psychotherapy and counseling politics are absolutely horrific. We're just very bad at it. And analysis and activism has also spent a lot of time on our process, the politics of our own group, the psychological politics of our own group. So all this will come up in the conference. International speakers, maybe people will not have heard of them if they're not Jungian, but in the Jungian and sort of Jungian world, they're very famous people. But we have the leading Italian Jungian analyst called Luigi Zoya, who's written a book which, unusually for a book by an analyst, has become a bestseller about the history of Italy, the political and psychological history of Italy. We have a man called Tom Singer from San Francisco, who invented the idea of the cultural complex and who was one of the leaders in the production of the book about Trump as pathologically narcissistic, etc., etc. These are well-known people. And I think I don't want to say that they're all fantastic, except obviously must be careful. They are all fantastic speakers. However, some of them are really, really distinguished people in the field, and it will be worth it just to plug in for a few hours. It's about 5 hours,
Yeah.
but it will be recorded, and you will get it if you RSVP and register. You'll get the recording in due course. Listen, I'm involved in so many conferences. I've been involved in so many conferences. I'm passionate about this one. I really am. Analysis and Activism.